Okay, Sarahzin, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarahzin S. I am part of the Customer Experience Engineering team here at Microsoft, focusing on Microsoft Information Protection, data loss prevention. And today, my main goal here is to give you guys an overview of what's offered under the Microsoft Information Protection umbrella and focus a little bit more so on the data loss prevention side. So while we're going through, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to go through and answer those questions. And if you need anything else in the middle too, I hope, Steve, it's not too much of an issue if we have a discussion in the middle as well.
No, absolutely not. It's your presentation.
All right, perfect. So if you want to jump in the middle, please feel free to do so. I won't be offended in any way. My main goal is just get the information out to you guys as well. So in terms of our agenda, like I mentioned, we'll be doing our Microsoft Information Protection offering and going into the various ways that we can do our data loss prevention. As a heads up, we do live in a world of acronyms, so I will do my best to let you know what the acronym is. So if I'm saying MIP, it's Microsoft Information Protection, DLP is data loss prevention, and I'll try to go through and as I say anything else, give you kind of what that is so you can follow along as well. So after we do those overviews, we'll do a demo and we'll go through some common customer use cases, especially including the education environment as well. And then I'll provide you with the link to some of the resources where you can access more information on MIP and DLP in general. So with that being said, I'm going to move forward and jump into our overall offering. And so at first, this slide may seem very overwhelming, but it's actually one of my favorites and actually my team's favorites too, because it gives you an idea of what's actually being offered in our information protection stack. We don't just have one product, they're all integrated with one another, and they all extend to things on the prevention side or on the information protection side as well. So I think I'm getting a little feedback there. Did anybody have a question? No worries. So we're going to go ahead and start out just in the middle here, which is our MIP, Microsoft Information Protection, with our data classification service. What this does is this is mainly talking about the information types that we have that are built in or custom, depending on your environment, and how that kind of goes into all our different offerings. So you can take the data classification service and put it into Office 365. So you can take that into SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, OneDrive, even Power BI as well. You can also jump on over into the Endpoint DLP aspect, depending on the information types. You can prevent things like having things copied or uploaded or data being taken from one of your cloud apps to another app. And then if you jump on over to the top right there on the MCAS side, so even though it's called Microsoft Information Protection and Microsoft Cloud App Security, the information actually with this integration can go into third-party applications with things like Salesforce, Box, Dropbox, G Suite as well. And then, of course, we have our on-prem, which is very popular for many of our customers in the financial industry, as well as even within the educational industry as well. And so this allows you with network shares and finding local shares overall to kind of go through and be able to take this information. So the main takeaway from this slide is that we have our baseline information types and being able to protect that data, and then just taking it to the different boundaries that we offer through Microsoft in general. Now, kind of going on to the customer benefits, this may seem a little salesy, but the main goal here is to let you know that within our overall infrastructure, we have everything that is part of our built-in labeling that goes through, like I said, the 365. We have trainable classifiers. These are information types that you can actually train to detect certain types of data in your environment. It is all within a unified admin console, which is a compliance portal, where you can see all the different types of ways of implementing data loss prevention, as well as your labeling schema in your environment too. And then, of course, Main goal is that this is extensible, so you can take this from your Microsoft apps and take it over to the non-Microsoft apps too. So these are the key customer benefits. And then when we jump into just mainly focusing on data loss prevention, the goal is that when you're doing DLP policies, that you protect the data that's in motion, protect data that's in use, and protect data that's at rest, right? And so by doing so, how do you make sure that you're not managing all your different types of data from different portals? So we try to go through and make it so that when you're in the compliance portal, that you're creating policies, you can create them all, of course, in one location. You have the integration with the data classification services, so you have the information types there. You're provided with different ways of onboarding your systems in a way that you're not sitting there trying to figure out what to click, but it's actually guided. And then, of course, when you're having the alerting, it's unified. And when you go to the end user experiences, it is all integrated with one another. So the goal here is to make sure that all of this is kind of working together. And so as you have these different components, it's important to know that this is now taken into things like the cloud DLP, the endpoint third-party based API, as well as on-prem services, like I mentioned before. So the bottom mindset here of having all of these integrations and native onboarding with three different types of data isn't just for Microsoft products, it's for third party as well. It's not just for Office 365, you could do for endpoint DLP as well as on-prem. So there are multiple integrations here, and it's important to note that they all work together and you can set it up. And once we go into our demo later on, I can show you a little bit more so what that really means. Now, when we're talking about just MIP versus DLP, we know that DLP is part of MIP, but in this case, we're talking more so about labeling and having the labeling policies under MIP, and then DLP is more so just if you're sharing it with somebody external, if you're sharing it in SharePoint in different places. So the main goal here is to kind of talk about how they work together, what are the pros, what are the cons, how can one complement each other as well. So when we jump onto the common traits here, the cool thing that I say is that you have, of course, the sensitive content detection, right? So we have more than 100 built-in information types, and then, of course, you have the ability to create your own information type depending on your environment as well. Especially being in the education industry, student ID numbers is a great way of having an information type that you can create for your environment too. So being able to kind of monitor that usage and apply additional protections to ensure that you're not compromising that data. So having that sensitive content being detectable is something that's part of both with the labels and DLP. They're both, of course, integrated across all of our solutions, and they don't require any clients. This is all clientless here. You have the different platform services that are shared within the two. So you can be going into Activity Explorer, you have different areas of seeing the data. It is, of course, managed from the Compliance Center. So you're not jumping from one portal to another. As many of you know, we love our portals. We have so many portals. And the good news is that with the MIP and the DLP here, we are all within compliance.microsoft.com. And last but not least, you have the unified logging, so the data from both are being logged. Now, let's jump on over to the strengths. So for MIP labels with protection, the strength is that if there is a false positive, you are able to configure it so it's handled by the user of being able to, yep, definitely with our portals here, of being able to go and let an admin or somebody know that this is a false positive, or being able to actually just override that labeling that has a protection in general. You can have your users be more so involved with manual labeling. So a lot of companies, they want automatic labeling in their environment, but some folks really want the user to have more control, right? So they get to decide if this document should have a label in it, not the engine in the back end. So the strength is that you can have the users actually help with the manual labeling there. It does work everywhere in the sense that the protection does travel with that file itself and it's location independent. So if the file has a in a label with encryption already in place, it's going to move along with that file, so you don't have to worry about that. And then, of course, the restrictions are applicable to both internal and external users. So depending on how you configure the encryption, you can actually configure it so that if you have external users that are guest users in your environment, they're included. If you have certain domains included, you could have user groups. You have a lot more configuration on the string side here with what you can put for within that label too. Now, on the opposite end for DLP, in terms of the strengths, you have on the kind of a contrasting opinion here, which is that it happens automatically with the user without user intervention. So in a sense, you're kind of going back into the automation a little bit more so that you have the system doing the policy for you. So if so-and-so decides to send an email that has social security numbers to your competitor college or some form of a company where you shouldn't be sending that data, you can have the system automatically block that email from being sent or do certain activities or actions to prevent that data from being lost. That is done automatically and based off of that configuration. So it's without the user intervention, the admin sets that up. You can apply these restrictions both interactively or within the background itself. So like I said, like that, the whole entire process is done within the service without the user. Or you can have users apply things like being able to provide a user justification or have a little bit more interaction there if you want to. So you kind of have both processes there. And then the last thing that I will say is that if there are certain rules there, because there's so much automation on this side, the user cannot bypass it. So you have a lot more control on the admin side, and you dictate a little bit more on how those users handle that DLP. So oddly enough, their strengths are that they kind of, one's a little bit more manual, one's a little bit more automated, but you can have the opposite within both of those platforms on the strength side. Now, on the weaknesses, they also complement each other. So the first one is on the MIP label side. You protect others from, you only protect from others and the content owner has full authority. So when you create your own document and you apply a label on it that has encryption, if you are not included in the encryption of that label, because you are the originator, the owner of that content itself, you still have access to it. So you cannot take your access away as an owner by applying that label. Now, you have, of course, limited support outside of Office documents and email. We're working on improving the types of documents that you can apply these labels to, but mainly it's the Office documents that can have a label and, of course, the email side. And then, of course, you have the app compatibility in terms of the performance. So even though the label travels with the file, if you are unable to open that file without the correct program, then you won't have access to that file, even though you're part of the encryption. So the compatibility issue is there. It doesn't mean that the file will get compromised. It just means you need to find a compatible app to be able to open that file. Last but not the least, on the DLP side for the weaknesses here, of course, you have the, if there's a false positive, it's a little bit more intrusive in the sense that you have to go through and investigate within the information type itself, find the source data, find the surrounding characters to ensure that this is actually an exception or this is a false positive. As you go through with the policy tips that are popping up, it's not cohesive in that it's available in all of our products with different conditions. And so we are working on trying to see how we can improve that. These rules, of course, have that automation and you don't have that user input. So when you create the policies, they're created automatically based on what you're trying to automate. And it is pretty noisy, and I'm not sure about all of you, but sometimes at least my team, we get a lot of alert fatigue because we're alerted on so many different things. And so there are a large number of alerts because you're creating these different policies, which can be a negative depending on how you manage your alerts in your environment overall. And then if you have different internal data flows and different processes, we're working on trying to improve that so you can export that. But at this time, it's not something that you can easily take out. Now, even though we have these different strengths and weaknesses, the main thing is that they do work together and they leverage each other's strengths and mitigate the weaknesses together. So it's a better together story. And when you're doing the overall DLP policy, that's one of the cool parts of having this in the same portal. You're able to combine the two together. So now we've gone through, we've done an overview of what MIP is, an overview of what DLP is, and a run through of the strengths and weaknesses. My next goal here is to walk you through the different ways or different locations you can actually apply data loss prevention policies. Sorry, just having a little bit of water here. So on the first part, we have, of course, Teams DLP. Now, on the Teams DLP side here, we have the ability to automatically be able to block messages that have certain types of sensitive information going through. And what I'll be showing you a little bit later on in our demo is that we have the ability to do this with a custom information type that we've actually created in our environment. We can, of course, educate our end users by giving them notifications when we have a certain type of alert popping up, as well as policy tips as to why this is being blocked in the environment. We have all the different information types, like I mentioned before, that are built in as well as custom coming into place here. And then these will work across different environments because we're not really dependent on a specific platform here. So the goal is mainly within that chat itself. They are scanned in real time for sensitive information, and this can trigger that alert or block it from being shared within chat overall. Now, I wanted to give a brief overview of the DLP policies configuration in terms of scoping it for Teams DLP. The first thing to note here is that let's exclude the individual user accounts here. So depending on your environment and how you use 365 groups or security groups or distribution lists, what you're protecting is really dependent on what groups you have. So if you have a combination of both a security group as well as a 365 group, you'll notice that the DLP protection that we have is not available for all three aspects of the one-on-one chats, the general chats, or the private channels. So you'll have to go through and actually include both a security group and a 365 group if you manage them differently in your environment to ensure that all three aspects are actually being hit by your DLP protection. Or you can just keep it at the all level, in which case you don't need to specify that information. The same thing happens with the exclusions, and I'll show you this once we're in the policy itself. Now, the individual user accounts wise, it's a little bit different because, of course, a private channel or one-on-one chat, they'll automatically have it applied. The general chat's a little different because you have more than one user involved, and therefore you don't have the individual user getting the DLP policy in a general chat. As a heads up, this is all based off of the Teams DLP infrastructure, Teams infrastructure, and we have built our DLP offering on top of it. And so if something were to happen with the way that configuration is created, then we would update it here, and hoping that in the future that we'll be able to do something with just one type of group instead of two types of group there. So that's on the Teams DLP side. The next component where we can also do DLP is within our endpoints. So we have our endpoint data loss prevention here. This is something that's already built in natively. We don't need an agent for this. So while these users are enrolled in the endpoint DLP overall, outside of the agent here, these capabilities really help to just manage that data in your environment. And so if you're doing things with alerting, if the information is being copied or sent somewhere else, you have the ability to see that in the portal, prevent that information, or just be alerted in general, and kind of have that information overall. So you can prevent all these different activities, and we're increasingly working on improving how many more capabilities we can add. You can block it, you can do auditing. It's all on the endpoint, and again, it's built in, so you don't need to go through and add in that extra agent as well. So this is more so a little bit easier. If you do have Defender for Endpoint, there is a seamless deployment with having the integration already put into place with deployed or with your agents that are already deployed in the compliance portal. So you can just go and look at the devices and you'll automatically be able to see it from that endpoint DLP. So it's all integrated with one another. It's a lot easier. And when I show you some of the configurations and settings, it's something that we can definitely do from the portal itself, and it's all there together. And we're doing a lot of investments in this area. And although I can't go into all the details, it is something that we're definitely focusing a lot on so that we can keep continuing to improve this product. So the next part here, this is MCAS, so this is Microsoft Cloud App Security. This is our CASB solution here. So that's Cloud Access Security Broker. And so once we go into the portal 2, we'll see that there's an integration within our compliance portal going into the CASB 2. And so it's one directional. So once you create a data loss prevention policy, it'll automatically populate in MCAS, and you won't be able to edit it within MCAS. It'll be grayed out because you're managing it from the unified portal in the compliance center here. So it does require you to have these third-party applications already be connected in MCAS. So if you're using things like Box, G Suite, Dropbox, and Salesforce, they need to be connected first before you can go through and create some of these policies themselves. But again, the main goal is we want this unified experience. So all these different components would be part of the compliance portal, and you'll be able to see some of this information too. Now we've covered, of course, our products. We've done more so on the cloud side. The next part here is going to be on-prem. And the goal here is really to show you that when we're doing some of the data sets here, we can also do DLP and data loss prevention policies with a non-cloud based as well. So within our on-prem data loss prevention, we do have the ability to run on what we call our AIP, or Azure Information Protection Scanner. If you have the AIP scanner already in your environment, then when you do the data loss prevention side here, we're using the same technology to go through, of course, discovering the sensitive data that you have within your on-prem repositories. So you can choose the different repositories and see what's available there within the compliance portal. If it's being shared in a certain way, you can see that information popping up and prevent that from happening as well. If you have different things with data regulations, you are able to go through and implement that within your policies too. And then, of course, even though this is a non-cloud aspect, as you are possibly planning your deployment to go from on-prem and migrate over to the cloud, you can choose what types of files or what files in your environment that are on-prem can actually be migrated over. And so the goal here is to basically have this protection and labeling of the data before it's been migrated to the cloud, and also be able to prevent the sharing overall. So some of the main use cases here, and a different way that we actually have them integrated with one another. So now for this part, I'm going to go ahead and jump on over into our compliance portal. Like I mentioned before, in our compliance portal, we have, which is compliance.microsoft.com, we have a couple of different areas where we can do kind of handle our DLP and overall information protection in general. So the 3 most important sections here will, of course, be in information protection. This is where you set up your labels, create your label policies, and do auto labeling. And so if you have anything else popping up, things like confidential or highly confidential, this is where that pops up. Now, when you go to data classification, you have a couple additional things here. This is mainly on the information type side. So you can go through and create your trainable classifiers. You have your built-in sensitive information types as well, including also your custom information types too. You also have exact data matches. So you configure the first half of your exact data match in the compliance portal and finish the rest off in PowerShell. And then of course you have things like Content Explorer, which is where you're able to see all the different information types that you have. So whether it's the built-in or it's custom, and you can actually go into the different locations and be able to see where that information is actually in your environment. So you do see a lot more of the data here, and it could be on Exchange, OneDrive, or SharePoint. And just trying to go ahead and show you some examples here. So you can jump in and you see the different information, and then you'll actually see the different information types that have been matched. So you can see that within the Content Explorer, and then Activity Explorer. This is where you can see things from all the different endpoints from SharePoint, DLP, Scanner. Anytime you have a match or an activity, whether it's a label being applied or DLP rule matching, they will all pop up here, and you'll see it within just the overall Activity Explorer themselves. So now, on the sensitive information type here, I did want to show you something really quickly as part of our demo. So we have this custom information type here, which we call Igor custom sit. And so what this has done is we've gone through and we've created a keyword list here. So the keyword list is that this is a custom sit. And this is what I'll be showing you in our Teams demo in a little bit. So want to go ahead and let you know that this was created, and you can create different lists in your environment to make sure that you have whatever information that you want covered in included in your policies as well. And so that was on the data classification side with the content, activity, and of course some of the information here. Now the data loss prevention side, this is where you do your DLP policies. Couple things I wanted to show you, which is of course you have the overview here. It gives you just kind of a, the top activities are detected, how you can kind of stay up to date. But when you go to the policy side here, you have a few things that are already in place here. So of course you have the status and then the ability to extend it to teams as well. We'll be going in through the Igor test for Teams DLP, which is basically allowing me to not send that data. But let's jump on into creating a policy here. A couple things in place. We have different templates which you can start with to kind of help guide you on that overall policy. So if you're doing things with like privacy or medical and health or financial, they do all pop up here. So depending on what you're looking to have, they're just overall templates you can start with, and they'll have the information types already for you, already put into place. For this one, let's just go ahead and do custom, where you can choose your information type in general. Let's go next. We'll just go ahead and create this policy overall. And this is where you have all the different locations that I did go through in the presentation, right? So you have Exchange, which can be scoped via distribution groups. You have SharePoint, OneDrive, of course, Teams. The devices here is Endpoint DLP. Then you have MCAS, and then of course your on-prem repositories as well. As you go through each of these different types, you have different ways of configuring that information. So for instance, if we choose to just do Exchange online, or sorry, Exchange email, when you go to the next page here, you create the different rules. You have the different conditions where you can go through and be able to choose what you want to be part of the DLP. So if you have a specific sender, or if there's a certain type of header that's missing, or if the content contains, so if this has the, a certain label or an information type, and it's being sent out, you can do a specific action, which is to restrict the access overall, add in more folks to it or do something else so that you can control that overall DLP policy. While you're doing that, of course, scroll down, you have more with them allowing the user to override it. And then if there's any type of match, you can start the processing. And then, of course, you can notify users with policy tips that they're violating a policy. That's on the Exchange side. And similar to like with OneDrive and SharePoint, this is when you can go through and do things with the sharing as well and creating the rule. You have the conditions of extension, content contained, it's shared, and then of course taking the actions of restricting that activity too. So we have the different ways of controlling it on that end. And then of course, when you go into things like Endpoint DLP and MCAS, it's a little bit different. Go ahead and show you that really quickly here. So when you go into the actions you can take here, so restrict third-party apps, this is the MCAS configuration, and then audit or restrict activities on this would go into the Windows devices. So when you go to Windows devices, you can see like if you want to audit or block some of these configurations overall. And then, of course, if you go into the third-party apps, it'll let you choose what you want to do with some of that data too. Make it private, trash it, remove external users. I think I had something pop up here. I've had a hard time imagining how a university would come up with an agreement on what type of DLP policy should be applied to everyone. Yes, I definitely have quite a few education customers who go through the same process. And so depending on the environment themselves, when they get to this page, this is where they have I don't want to say a difficult time, but a hard time of choosing what they want configured and how they want configured. But it comes down to what I've seen outside of the information type, different groups that they want to be part of the DLP policy, right? So if there is a specific group of leadership that can send certain things out in the email, they're able to do so. The same thing with the OneDrive as well as like Teams chats. I will say that I've noticed for the most part that OneDrive is not that prevalent in the policies for many of the my customers in the university arena, but at least with the sites, emails, and then of course on the Teams channels here, there's a lot more activities involved. Financial. Yep, definitely have seen that as well. Especially with the financial, if you're like a financial aid counselor or advisor, they have certain types of labels that are already assigned to them. And then the DLP is that when they go into the Exchange email, you choose them part of the distribution group, and you can actually then configure the policy as to who can they actually send it to or not send it to. So if the recipient is this domain is part of a certain group, you can then go ahead and go into your actions and prevent that from being sent out. So it depends on the customers and the use cases, but I have definitely seen it be changed to specific groups and not necessarily the entire user group would have it. So I've seen that for sure. So for the next part here, I'm going to jump into the quick demo that I had for the Teams DLP. And then what we'll do is we'll go and do a little bit more discussion on some of those common customer use cases and how that's worked. The first thing on the Teams DLP here, again, like we mentioned, we created that custom information type overall, and this is a custom SIT. And we're going to go ahead and use that as part of our chat and to show you a little bit how that kind of looks in this environment overall. So as we go into this place here, and we're part of a chat, and I have this information type, this is a custom SIT, I can go ahead and try to send that data over, and as it tries to go through that process, we should get an alert that this message was blocked, and you'll get a notification here. And you can go to learn more to figure out why that was blocked in your environment. But this has been, like I said, mainly with some of my education customers using this to send to specific groups. Or certain types of information like social security numbers should not be shared within the chat. That's been a top use case that we've seen with multiple customers here. So very high level overview of just the portal, some of the DLP policies, and a demo in general. The next part here, I really wanted to kind of go through and discuss is more so on the common customer use cases that we do have. And I think I have a question popping up here. Do they notify the departments about risky activity somehow? If so, how? So scope delegation to see. So for the scope delegation, that is something we're currently working on overall, trying to figure out how we can go through and have the ability for certain groups to see certain data. It is still under work, and we're trying to figure out how that's going to look overall. Now, in terms of the notifying the departments, at this time, it's still defaulting over into the email notification for each of those DLP policies, and that is scoped to a distribution list or a set of emails for a specific department. In addition, when we go back into the actual environment of our DLP and we go into Activity Explorer and we look at the alerts, excuse me, where's my DLP? The alerts here, you can actually go into the specific different types of information here. And when you're doing the overall details of that activity and kind of seeing the different information, you are able to go through and assign to a specific user that you want to investigate that different type here. In addition, when you go into clicking the map itself, you can see from here the sensitive information type that was detected, if this would actually load here really quickly, and some of the details of that source too, so you can go into that file and be able to download it here too. So depending on how you go through and actually configure your environment, you can send it to specific departments and specific users, and then take away the ability to see some of the incidents and the information types depending on who that user is too. Can you get DLP activity via the MS Graph? We are working on getting more capabilities with our APIs right now. And so that is something that is on our roadmap, but we don't have too much data and it has not been fully assessed by our engineering. So to have a central service, we have to build our own activity notification capability. Brian, could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'm just summarizing the outcome of that earlier questions. In other words, because the tool doesn't have a delegated scope of readability so that we can restrict departmental units to only be able to see their relevant activity, we would have to provide that capability ourselves via some sort of custom code or something.
At this time, yes, but it is something that the team is working on in general.
Yeah, I'm just saying that that's a blocker for
Yeah.
for pretty much any large university.
Gotcha. And so with that being said, it's, and I don't want to bring up any names or anything since this is being recorded. If you could message me after, I can try to see if we can, if I can provide some more details too regarding it based off of a NDA and things like that too.
Great, yeah, I am in the AIP advisors, but I haven't heard anything relevant there to this topic.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, let's talk offline and see what we can do. And then I know my colleague Patrick did go ahead and put in the management API information. And many of our customers do use the APIs here to get additional information to get the and maybe in a custom solution or elsewhere too. So perfect. All right. I know that we're coming up near the end here, so I'm going to go ahead and try to review this, mainly focus on the education side here. So within one of our major university partners, one of our customer scenarios here involved a huge subset of false positives that were popping up in their environment. And the reason being their student ID numbers matched the same format of multiple types of social security numbers. What I mean by that is that the first three digits of the social security numbers were the same format for New York or California. So when they were using our DLP policies with our built-in information types, it was not working because it would be going through and detecting on the wrong information, and they really need to protect the files that had those student ID numbers on it too. So what they ended up doing was they ended up creating their own information type with the actual number, excuse me, with the actual numbers here. So when they were able to detect, they were able to detect on that custom set and be able to find that in their environment to do their overall DLP policies. And so they're also kind of going through and looking into using the exact data matching functionality. So they have a list of all the student ID numbers in their environment, and then they're going through and matching based on that information type as well. So these were the main use cases on the false positive side, which were based off of the fact that they had something that was very similar, and not sure for many of the major universities here if that's something to take into consideration. But on that side, it was definitely used to go through and figure out a way to decrease it and then prevent that data from being sent externally to a domain that wasn't on their approved domain list. So that would be one of the top customer scenarios in the education field where we had a very big, I guess you could say a very, very long conversation, and we worked with the customer to get those decreased and in a way that would actually make sense in their environment too. So that was one of those main use cases. And now the other thing that I will say that's kind of similar to the financial services that go into education is the old data. And many of our educational institutions have data that's stored on-prem that are several years old, and they're unable to go through and figure out how that sharing is going through and being able to detect that information. So one of the goals is to have our AIP scanner go through, do, of course, automatic labeling of the data based off of the information types you have already configured, and then take that to upload it into the cloud environment, or prevent that data from being uploaded to any personal type of cloud services. So enterprise level would be like, say you have an agreement with of course, us with SharePoint, OneDrive, but also like if you went with Box or Dropbox. But then if you have, say, like a Google Drive account where you're trying to upload, that's something you can use Endpoint DLP to prevent that data from being uploaded to as well. So different ways of kind of going through the customer scenarios, and at least from the education side, with the majority of my customers I've seen, the main goal was to reduce those false positives and be able to detect that information correctly and prevent it from being sent to a list of unallowed domains at that time. And so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into just the overall resources here, kind of for our team overall. So if you're looking at just Microsoft Information Protection and Compliance information, we have our one-stop shop here where we have things like deployment acceleration guides, some best practices, additional training. Highly recommend you visit our one-stop shop. We also have a YouTube series for our scenario-based demos where we go through customer scenarios and we talk about just ways of how you should behave in those scenarios and kind of how to configure that information as well. So please do check that out. And then if you are part of the enterprise community there, we highly recommend joining our preview community for, of course, the information protection and compliance side, as well as endpoint DLP in general. So Please let me know if you need these links put in the chat, and I'll go ahead and put in the chat. But other than that, I did want to save some time here to kind of go through any questions anybody had. I try to, I cover a lot of data and information within a very short period of time for the overview. And I, again, wanted to make sure that we set some time aside for some questions.
All right.
So I'm not seeing anything, Steve. I don't see any additional in the chat or
Nope.
in the thing. And so I did want to say that if any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I think, Brian, you and I were going to talk offline as well. But if you need anything else, feel free to reach out. Myself, my team are always here for you. And I'm very excited that we had the opportunity today to come in to give you this overview, which had a lot of information packed in about 45 minutes. So I appreciate the time, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. And Steve, back over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. If there's no other questions at this point, I'm going to stop the recording.